Right now, the United States military is dropping, tens of millions of dollars of advanced ordnance just to claim total air superiority in the Middle East.
Right.
Meanwhile, the UK is preparing for a direct, completely unprecedented naval shootout with Russia.
Yeah, it's incredibly tense.
And global physical oil is trading at an earth-shattering $170 a barrel.
Which is just, it's a terrifying number.
It really is.
Yeah.
And yet the single most dangerous weapon deployed in the last 48 hours wasn't like a stealth bomber or a hypersonic cruise missile.
Well, not at all.
It was a single decentralized soldier standing in a mountain pass with a shoulder-fired tube who just vaporized a $74 million American fighter jet.
Yeah.
Today's Thursday, March 26, 2026.
Right.
We are exactly 28 days into the conflict between Iran, Israel, and the United States.
And, the disconnect between the official military narrative and the actual geopolitical reality on the ground, it's never been wider. We are looking at a fundamental rewiring of the global order happening in real time. The traditional metrics we use to measure who is winning a war, they're completely breaking down.
Exactly. And that is the core mission of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
Because for everyone listening, you're watching this surreal history unfold on your phone screens.
Yeah.
While just going about your daily commute or like doing the dishes.
Right. It feels distant, but it's really not.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The stakes here extend far beyond lines on a Middle Eastern map.
Absolutely.
It's been our last few deep dives covering those first 3 weeks of the conflict, but today we are strictly forecasting the next few weeks.
Yeah, we've got a massive influx of fresh source material to go through.
Right, mostly YouTube videos from just the last couple of days, journalist reports, and interviews with globally known geopolitical and military experts.
And we are tracking the mechanisms that will directly dictate the price of your groceries, the stability of your national currency, and really the balance of global superpowers.
But before we jump in, to do that effectively, we need to set a really strict analytical frame.
Yeah, that's crucial. Our source material spans the entire ideological spectrum.
Right.
So our objective today is completely impartial. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints or, taking sides in what is a highly charged, devastating conflict.
Right, we're just laying out the facts.
Exactly. We are here to independently map out the physics, the economics, and the military logic contained within these sources. We just want to understand the underlying mechanics driving this next phase.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the immediate military situation.
Right.
Specifically, that massive chasm between the Pentagon's podium and what's actually happening in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, the narrative gap is huge.
Because over the last 48 hours, the White House has been heavily promoting Operation Epic Shiri.
Right, and if you read their press releases, they are projecting this historic, unmitigated triumph.
Yeah. They claim to have struck 9,000 enemy targets.
9,000.
And they report a 90% reduction in Iranian ballistic missile and drone launches.
Right.
But most remarkably, they claim to have utterly annihilated the Iranian Navy.
Yeah, they're stating they've destroyed over 140 naval vessels, including roughly 50 mine layers.
Which sounds incredibly definitive.
Well, the official language being used is the largest elimination of a naval force in a 3-week period since the Second World War.
Wow.
Yeah, it's heavily designed to signal that the decapitation strikes have worked, and the adversary is critically degraded.
But here's the thing. I'm looking at the satellite data and the thermal imaging provided in the Pentagon's own intelligence leaks.
Right.
And we have visual confirmation. Like, the thermal signatures literally show 140 burning holes in the water.
They do.
So how are the independent military analysts in our sources pushing back and claiming this air campaign is actually failing?
Well, because...
we have visual confirmation of the wreckage, right?
Right, but you have to analyze what those thermal signatures actually represent.
Okay, what are they?
The naval intelligence analysts point out a crucial tactical deception here. Iran hasn't stationed its primary operational naval assets out in the open water to be targeted.
So the burning ships are...
Those burning hulls are largely surface decoys?
You're kidding.
No, they're outdated vessels, empty mock-ups that are literally rigged with radar-reflecting materials and, basic heat emitters.
Just to trick the sensors.
Exactly. They are specifically designed to absorb American ordnance.
Wow. So it's like a boxer who proudly claims they've won the match because they threw the most punches.
Right.
Completely ignoring that they are currently backed into a corner and just taking heavy hits to the jaw.
That's a perfect analogy. The U.S. is spending multi-million-dollar precision-guided munitions to blow up empty metal shells.
So where's the actual functioning Navy then?
It's built into the geography.
What do you mean?
Iran has spent decades carving these massive, fortified submarine pens and speedboat deployment bays deep into the coastal mountain ranges along the Persian Gulf.
Like literally inside the mountains.
Exactly. The actual operational assets, the swarms of fast attack craft and the midget submarines that actually pose a threat to shipping, they're sitting under hundreds of feet of solid rock.
Right, so you can't bomb when your satellites can't even see.
Exactly.
Right.
And traditional bunker-busting munitions, they really struggle against that volume of natural geography.
Which perfectly explains why the airspace itself is still highly contested.
Yeah.
Despite all these claims of total American air superiority. I mean, the sources detail the downing of a U.S. F-18 Super Hornet over the weekend.
Yeah, that was a massive shock to a lot of people.
Right. What strikes me is the mechanics of this. We are talking about an aircraft equipped with state-of-the-art electronic countermeasures.
Right.
Radar warning receivers, advanced avionics.
And it was taken down by a Russian-made IGLA system.
Man-pads. A shoulder-fired missile.
Yeah.
Walk us through how a single soldier with a shoulder-fired tube defeats a $74 million platform.
Well, it really comes down to the evolution of infrared seeker technology. Early generation shoulder-fired missiles, they basically just tracked the hottest thing in the sky.
Right. Usually the engine exhaust.
Exactly. So an F-18 pilot could just deploy magnesium flares, which burn way hotter than the engine.
And the missile just chases the flare instead of the jet.
Right. But the IGLA systems Russia is allegedly supplying to Iran. They utilize dual-band infrared and ultraviolet seekers.
Ultraviolet.
Yeah. They don't just look for heat. They look for the specific aerodynamic profile and the ultraviolet footprint of an aircraft fuselage against the background sky.
Oh, wow. So it has a built-in logic gate.
Exactly.
It sees the flare, recognizes the heat signature, doesn't match the ultraviolet profile of a jet, ignores the countermeasure, and just continues tracking the F-18.
Precisely. And because these systems are passive, meaning they don't emit a radar ping until the missile actually leaves the tube.
Oh, right. So the jet's warning systems don't even know it's there.
Yeah. The F-18's radar warning receivers don't go off until it's far too late to take evasive maneuvers.
Especially if the jet is flying low to avoid the higher altitude surface-to-air missile batteries.
Exactly. A decentralized infantryman hiding in the Zagros Mountains doesn't need a massive radar dish that can be targeted by a U.S. anti-radiation missile.
He just needs visual line of sight.
Yeah.
That concept of decentralization seems to be the defining characteristic of this entire battlefield.
It really is the key to understanding why Iran is holding out.
Because the U.S. doctrine relies on finding the central nervous system of an enemy and cutting it off, right? The whole decapitation strike idea.
Right, but the analysts and our sources are pointing out that Iran's military structure completely neutralizes that doctrine.
You know, it reminds me of the architecture of the early internet.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, when DARPA built the first packet switching networks, the whole point was to create a communication grid that could survive a nuclear strike.
Right.
There was no central server. If one node went down, the data just automatically routed around the damage through 1,000 other local nodes.
That is an incredibly accurate way to model Iran's command and control.
Really?
Yeah, they absorbed the lessons of the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, and more recently, the conflicts from June of last year, 2025.
Right.
They realized that a centralized hierarchical military pyramid is fatal against American air power.
Because the U.S. will just bomb the top of the pyramid.
Exactly. So they pre-delegated launch authority.
Wait, what does that mean in practice?
It means the second, third, and fourth layers of command stationed in those underground bunker complexes, they do not need a radio signal from Tehran to continue fighting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have legally pre-authorized operational parameters.
So if the central server goes dark, the local nodes just keep firing the missiles anyway.
Exactly. And this resilient architecture is exactly why the failure to secure the airspace over the Gulf is directly emboldening the proxies on the regional fronts.
Right.
Because the U.S. and Israel are forced to expend their interceptor stockpiles defending against the southern barrages from Iran.
Which means the northern front is suddenly exposed.
Yeah, and we are seeing Hezbollah exploit this arithmetic to an unprecedented degree.
The numbers in the reports are just staggering.
They really are.
Hezbollah executed 87 distinct operations in a single day this week.
Yeah.
And they reportedly destroyed 10 Merkava tanks.
Yeah.
But what the military analysts are really focusing on is the penetration of the Israeli air defense shield.
Right. The Iron Dome, David Sling, the U.S.-supplied Tay systems, the Patriot batteries.
The sources are indicating these systems are reaching a point of mathematical exhaustion.
Yeah, the interceptor to incoming ratio is simply failing.
Right.
And you have to look at the specific targets being hit because it reveals a highly calculated psychological and strategic intent.
They aren't just firing unguided rockets into empty fields anymore.
Not at all. Iranian and proxy missiles have struck dangerously close to the Dimona nuclear facility.
Wow.
They recently hit a white phosphorus plant in the Negev desert, and there are rolling, widespread blackouts across Tel Aviv right now.
I mean, hitting a white phosphorus plant isn't just about destroying infrastructure.
No.
It's about showcasing the ability to trigger a massive, toxic secondary disaster within your adversary's borders.
Exactly.
It sends a message like, we can touch your most sensitive, catastrophic vulnerabilities.
It shatters the civilian psychological shield.
Right.
The entire premise of the U.S.-Israeli defense posture was deterrence through overwhelming technological superiority.
And if the skies are open and the power grid is failing, the deterrence is basically evaporated.
Yeah, the opponent is absorbing the 9,000 strikes and continuing to operate at full capacity.
Which forces a massive strategic pivot.
It has to.
Because the air campaign is hitting empty decoys and packet-switched tunnel networks without changing the political reality.
Right.
So the Pentagon is reportedly preparing for the most drastic, irreversible next step.
The ground war.
Yeah. The sources indicate the administration is gaming out options for a major ground invasion. The phrase being leaked to journalists is the massive final blow.
Right. And this raises an important question. We need to analyze the specific force posture and the geographical targets being floated.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
Because the operational logic here is facing intense scrutiny from military historians.
The immediate data shows roughly 4,400 U.S. Marines arriving in the theater by Friday.
Right, deploying from Okinawa and San Diego.
And they are reportedly being augmented by elements of the 82nd Airborne Division.
Yeah.
And the primary targets on the planning table are Iranian islands in the Persian Gulf.
Exactly.
So let's look at option 1, Karg Island.
Okay.
Our sources show that Karg is the absolute jugular of the Iranian economy. It handles upwards of 90% of Iran's crude oil exports.
Which is massive.
It funds a quarter of their entire national budget. So the prevailing logic in Washington seems to be you seize Karg Island, you capture their economic engine, and you force them to the negotiating table.
Right. And then there are the islands situated much further south.
Like Larak, Keshem, and Abu Musa.
Yeah, directly inside the physical choke point of the Strait of Hormuz.
Which are crucial for shipping.
Exactly. Larak is vital. It's the physical observation post where the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy actively monitors and targets the commercial tankers.
And Abu Musa.
Abu Musa is highly militarized and historically disputed with the UAE.
Okay.
The theory is that occupying these southern islands allows the U.S. to physically peel back the anti-access area denial network and force the shipping lanes back open.
But I have to challenge the basic geographic premise of this strategy.
Okay, go ahead.
Specifically regarding Karg Island.
Right.
Karg is located in the extreme northern sector of the Persian Gulf. The bathymetric depth of the water up there is quite shallow.
Yes, it is.
And it is hundreds of miles away from the Arabian Sea. So if the ultimate geopolitical goal is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to save the global energy market,
Right.
how does seizing an island hundreds of miles in the opposite direction actually achieve that?
Well,
Doesn't it just stretch the U.S. naval supply lines across a massive, hostile corridor,
yes.
leaving a garrison of Marines isolated on a rock while the strait itself remains completely choked off by land-based batteries on the southern coast?
And the tactical flaw you are identifying right there is exactly what the defense analysts in our sources are sounding the alarm over.
So I'm not crazy for thinking this sounds extremely risky.
Not at all. There is a fundamental difference between an amphibious assault to capture a landmass and the logistical nightmare of holding it against an entrenched, technologically peer-level adversary.
Right.
The doctrine of holding the economy hostage only works if you can actually survive the occupation.
So what does that defense actually look like on these islands?
It is the textbook definition of an A2AD environment.
Anti-accessory denial.
Exactly. Iran hasn't just left these islands dormant. They have spent months heavily fortifying the beaches with overlapping layers of anti-tank and anti-personnel mines.
Wow.
They have seeded the interior infrastructure with booby traps, but most critically, they have camouflaged anti-ship cruise missile batteries inside what look like standard commercial shipping containers.
Wait, so a Marine expeditionary unit coming ashore via landing craft? Or like tilt-rotor ospreys?
Is moving into a pre-sighted kill zone.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, the historical parallel drawn by military analysts is the Battle of Okinawa.
Wow.
But beyond the immediate casualties of a landing, there is a glaring mathematical insufficiency at play here.
What do you mean?
Well, deploying 4,000 to 5,000 troops to occupy heavily fortified islands in the Persian Gulf is not a sustainable force posture.
Right.
Once they establish a beachhead, those troops stop moving. They become static targets.
And we just established earlier that Iran's decentralized ballistic missile network is fully operational and safely hidden in mountain tunnels.
Exactly.
You are essentially putting 4,000 American Marines on a bullseye, surrounded by water, and daring an adversary with thousands of precision-guided munitions to shoot at them.
Yeah, it risks a historic military catastrophe.
I mean, the density of incoming fire would rapidly overwhelm any localized point defense systems the Marines could bring ashore, right?
Absolutely. Which means the ground invasion, rather than acting as a final blow, could simply provide the adversary with high-value American hostages in the form of besieged battalions.
And if the military options, both the air campaign and the ground invasion, are failing to open the Strait of Hormuz,
Right.
that brings us to the immediate, terrifying reality of the global economic chokehold.
Yeah, this is where it hits home.
This is the mechanism that transitions this from just a regional Middle Eastern war to a crisis that directly impacts the listener.
Exactly.
Whether you are in Sydney, London, or Los Angeles, you're watching the real-time strangulation of the Western macroeconomy.
And the data on maritime traffic is unequivocal here.
Yeah?
Total commercial tanker transits through the Strait of Hormuz have fallen effectively to zero.
Zero.
The shipping insurance markets have completely collapsed for that corridor.
Right.
The strait is closed, and the consensus among energy analysts is that it will remain closed until Iran explicitly allows it to reopen.
Let's trace the physical mechanics of this disruption, because it moves much faster than people realize.
It really does.
Take Australia, for example.
Right.
Right now, there are over 500 gas stations with dry tanks.
Wow.
Of those, 187 have completely run out of diesel.
And diesel is critical.
Exactly. Diesel isn't just about passenger cars. Diesel is the lifeblood of the logistics grid.
Right.
It powers the mining equipment extracting iron ore.
Yeah.
It powers the agricultural combines harvesting wheat. It powers the trucking fleets delivering food to the supermarkets.
When diesel stops, the physical economy stops.
Completely.
And we are seeing identical cascading failures across Asia and Europe.
Really? Where else?
Well, India, for one, a manufacturing powerhouse of over 1 billion people.
Right.
They are implementing strict fuel rationing right now. They are actively shutting down highly energy-intensive sectors, like their domestic plastics industry,
Because they can't get the oil.
because they literally cannot secure the petroleum feedstocks required to keep the factories running.
That's huge.
And Spain has enacted emergency state-funded fuel subsidies simply to prevent the collapse of their domestic transportation sector.
It's everywhere.
The Philippines was officially declared a state of emergency over energy supplies.
And that scarcity is driving the price of the actual commodity to levels that just break economic models.
Oh, yeah.
We aren't just talking about paper contracts traded on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange.
No.
The sources note that physical, wet barrels of oil changing hands in the spot market are trading at $170 a barrel.
Which is astronomical.
And the U.S. administration is currently gaming out the macroeconomic shockwaves of crude hitting $200 a barrel.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture to quantify that shockwave,
Yeah.
an OECD report highlighted in the materials projects that a sustained closure of the strait will spike the underlying U.S. inflation rate by 4.2%.
A 4.2% baseline spike. That's insane.
It is.
Central banks have spent the last 3 years plunging the economy into high interest rate environments just to shave inflation down by 0.5%.
Right.
And this conflict just drops a 4-point bomb onto the global financial system.
Yeah.
But it's not just the consumer price index. This fundamentally threatens the entire technology investment thesis of the current decade.
Oh, absolutely. The AI boom.
Right. We've seen trillions of dollars poured into the AI investment boom, driving Western equity markets.
And that entire infrastructure requires two things to function.
Right.
Massive, uninterrupted streams of baseload electricity to power the data centers.
Yeah,
And highly specialized petroleum derivatives to manufacture the hardware.
exactly. The semiconductor fabrication plants in Taiwan, producing the advanced AI chips, they require ultra-pure helium and other hydrocarbon byproducts for their cooling and etching processes.
Right.
If the cost of global energy skyrockets, the cost of capital skyrockets alongside it.
Yeah, those massive multi-billion-dollar data center buildouts suddenly become completely economically unviable.
The financial analysts and the sources are warning that this isn't just a market correction.
No.
If the industrial base of Europe and Asia is forced into rolling blackouts for months, we are staring at a severe global depression.
Yet, amidst this universal chokehold, the sources reveal a fascinating structural bifurcation in the global energy market.
What do you mean by bifurcation?
The pain is not being distributed equally.
Oh.
We are witnessing a currency war and the rapid acceleration of the shadow fleet economy.
This is crucial to understand. While the major Western commercial fleets, the ships flagged in Liberia or Panama, and insured by the London P&I clubs.
Right, the mainstream tankers.
Yeah, they are paralyzed outside the Gulf. But the oil is still flowing to specific players.
Exactly.
China and India are still receiving energy shipments. So how does the mechanism of the shadow fleet actually bypass the military blockade?
It relies on a combination of maritime obfuscation and alternative financial plumbing.
Okay, break that down.
The shadow fleet consists of older, uninsured or alternatively insured vessels that routinely spoof their automatic identification system, or AIS, transponders.
So they just broadcast fake GPS location.
Exactly, while conducting dark ship-to-ship transfers of crude oil in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
Wow.
But the physical movement of the oil is only half the equation.
Right.
The far more dangerous shift for the West is how this oil is actually being paid for.
Because they are settling the trades entirely outside the SWIFT system.
Exactly.
China and India are buying this sanctioned oil using the Chinese yuan and the Indian rupee.
Yeah.
They are bypassing the US dollar completely.
Furthermore, Iran is actively using access to the Strait as a geopolitical reward mechanism.
How so?
The sources detail a specific carve-out granted to Spain.
Really? Why Spain?
Well, Iranian authorities allowed Spanish vessels safe passage through the blockade for one reason. The Spanish prime minister publicly condemned the military campaign as illegal.
Oh, wow. So Iran is explicitly demonstrating that they, not the United States Navy, dictate the terms of global maritime commerce in the Gulf.
Exactly.
Let's follow the mechanics of that reality to its ultimate conclusion.
Okay.
What does a world where the U.S. Navy cannot open the Strait of Hormuz actually mean for the petrodollar?
It means the fundamental architecture of U.S. financial hegemony is fracturing.
That's a huge statement.
It is, but look at it. The petrodollar system, established in the 1970s through agreements with Saudi Arabia, is brilliantly simple in its design.
Right.
The world agrees to price and trade oil exclusively in U.S. dollars.
Because everyone needs oil.
Exactly. Because every nation needs oil to survive, every nation must hold massive reserves of U.S. dollars. And they invest those dollars into U.S. Treasury bonds, which essentially allows the United States to export its inflation and finance its massive national debt at artificially low interest rates.
It creates a permanent, captive global demand for American fiat currency.
Precisely. But that entire financial architecture rests on a physical military bedrock.
The Navy.
The implicit guarantee that the United States Navy will act as the absolute guarantor of global shipping lanes.
Right.
It is, in crude geopolitical terms, a protection racket.
Yeah.
You price the oil in our currency, and our aircraft carriers ensure the oil safely leaves the Persian Gulf.
But if Operation Epic Fury fails to secure the airspace,
Right.
and the ground invasion is deemed a suicide mission,
Yeah.
and the strait remains closed, the protection racket is broken.
Exactly.
If nations realize that holding U.S. dollars no longer guarantees their access to energy,
Right.
and they must instead trade in yuan or rupees through the shadow fleet just to keep their domestic grids online.
The captive demand for the dollar evaporates.
Wow. And if foreign central banks dump their treasuries, the value of the dollar plummets. Inflation goes hyperparabolic, and the U.S. government loses its ability to deficit spend.
It is the potential collapse of the American economic model in real time.
which is exactly why the diplomatic deadlock we are currently seeing is so intractable.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher.
The back-channel negotiations are intensifying, but the competing demands are separated by a gulf of absolute strategic incompatibility.
Let's examine the diplomatic proposals outlined in the sources.
Okay.
The U.S. position is anchored by what is being called the 15-point plan drafted by the Trump administration.
Right.
And when you analyze the specific demands, it is not a negotiation.
Yeah.
It is a framework for total Iranian capitulation.
What does it actually demand?
It demands the complete verifiable dismantling of all Iranian ballistic missile production facilities and their entire nuclear enrichment infrastructure.
That is a maximalist posture.
It is. And the aggressive timeline attached to this proposal is heavily dictated by the U.S. domestic and geopolitical calendar.
Right. The diplomatic leaks indicate that Donald Trump is pushing fiercely to conclude this war within a 4 to 6 week window.
Yeah. And why is that?
Because he has a highly anticipated global summit scheduled with China's President Xi Jinping in May.
Right.
The geopolitical psychology here is transparent. Trump wants to walk into that summit in Beijing as the undisputed victor of the Middle East, having pacified the region and secured the global energy supply.
Exactly.
He wants to use that military momentum as leverage in his trade and strategic negotiations with China.
But the Iranians are reading the exact same macroeconomic data regarding the inflation spikes and the petrodollar threat that we just discussed.
Right.
They understand the fundamental weakness of the U.S. position. The West is on a ticking clock and Iran is not.
So what's their counterproposal?
Therefore, Iran's counterproposal, their 5-point plan, is equally maximalist, but it operates from a position of perceived leverage.
Okay, the 5-point plan essentially demands the complete reversal of U.S. foreign policy in the region.
Pretty much.
Iran demands an immediate halt to all U.S. and Israeli military operations.
Right.
They are demanding guaranteed massive war reparations to rebuild the infrastructure destroyed by the air campaign.
Yeah.
They demand the total unconditional withdrawal of all U.S. military forces from the Middle East.
Which the U.S. would never agree to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And crucially, they are demanding formal international recognition of their sovereign control over the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, they are attempting to establish a new legal reality here.
Like what?
Well, equating their control of the Strait of Hormuz to Egypt's control over the Suez Canal.
Oh, wow.
They want the power to legally toll, inspect, or block traffic at their absolute discretion.
And there is one final, incredibly specific condition in the Iranian proposal.
Right.
They are insisting that the ongoing conflict in Lebanon must be comprehensively included in any ceasefire agreement. On the surface, this is to protect their Hezbollah proxies. But politically, it is a laser-guided missile aimed directly at the domestic survival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Explain the domestic mechanics of that for the listener, because it's vital.
Okay, so Netanyahu's current political coalition and his ability to delay his own ongoing domestic legal tribunals is entirely dependent on maintaining a wartime state of emergency.
Right.
If Iran forces a comprehensive ceasefire that halts operations in both Gaza and Lebanon, that state of emergency collapses.
And then what?
The wartime unity government dissolves, elections are triggered, and Netanyahu likely faces severe domestic political and legal consequences.
Right.
Iran knows this. By tying the Persian Gulf ceasefire to Lebanon, they are ensuring that the Israeli leadership has every incentive to sabotage the deal,
Right.
further isolating the U.S. from its own ally.
So we have a situation where the U.S. requires a rapid face-saving victory to confront China, but Iran has zero incentive to provide an off-ramp.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They are watching the economic damage compound in Western capitals and calculating that strategic patience will break the American resolve before it breaks their underground military infrastructure.
Exactly. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how these two entrenched sides are communicating.
Right, they aren't talking directly.
No. The sources detail the frantic efforts of regional mediators trying to square this impossible circle.
And the most prominent player emerging in the intelligence reports is completely unexpected.
Yeah.
Pakistan.
The role of the Pakistani military and intelligence apparatus, the ISI, is a masterclass in geopolitical balancing right now.
How so?
Well, Pakistan shares a massive, porous, and historically volatile border with Iran in the Balochistan region.
Right.
They literally cannot afford a destabilized, collapsing Iranian state on their western flank.
Yeah, that would be a disaster for them.
However, the Pakistani military leadership also maintains deep decades-long institutional ties with the Pentagon and the CIA.
Right.
They reportedly have a direct, secure line into the highest levels of the White House.
So they are uniquely positioned to walk between the raindrops.
Exactly.
They're passing the messages back and forth, trying to act as the indispensable broker.
Yeah.
And the sources note this is causing intense friction with India, who feels entirely sidelined from the diplomatic process, despite being one of the nations most heavily impacted by the energy shortage.
But while Pakistan handles the diplomatic messaging, the absolute danger zone for rapid, catastrophic escalation lies with the Gulf states.
Right, specifically the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
The intelligence leaks regarding the UAE are deeply alarming.
Yeah, there are persistent reports that elements within the UAE might be actively assisting the United States in staging logistics for the impending ground invasion.
Right.
We are talking about allowing U.S. forces to utilize Emirati air bases or potentially offering up their territorial islands as forward operating bases for the Marines.
And the Iranian response to these leaks has been devoid of any diplomatic ambiguity whatsoever.
The rhetoric is explicitly apocalyptic.
It really is.
The Speaker of the Iranian parliament delivered a public warning stating that any regional nation that provides logistical support, airspace, or staging grounds for an American invasion will have its vital national infrastructure relentlessly targeted and turned into a parking lot.
We need to understand the fragility of the economic models of cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Okay, walk us through that.
These are gleaming, futuristic metropolises built in a hyper-arid desert.
Right.
They are entirely dependent on highly centralized, vulnerable infrastructure.
Like what?
Well, if Iranian precision ballistic missiles target the massive Jebel Ali power and desalination complexes, Dubai loses its fresh water supply. It becomes physically uninhabitable within 48 to 72 hours.
Wow.
If they target the financial hubs and the luxury real estate centers, the entire foreign investment-driven economic model of the UAE evaporates overnight.
So the Gulf states are trapped in an impossible paradox.
They really are.
They are terrified of Iranian regional hegemony and desperately want the U.S. security umbrella to remain intact.
Right.
But they know that if they actually help the U.S. execute that security umbrella, they will be the first ones annihilated by the Iranian retaliation.
Exactly. They cannot survive a direct kinetic exchange.
So while the Middle East stands on the precipice of total infrastructural war, and the United States rapidly exhausts its military stockpiles and its economic capital, the broader global chessboard is shifting.
Yeah.
The chaos in the Gulf is creating massive generational opportunities for rival superpowers.
We are witnessing the definitive rewiring of global alliances.
Let's start with Russia, because the sources indicate they are arguably extracting the highest immediate strategic value from this crisis.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because the Pentagon is currently facing a zero-sum logistical nightmare.
Right. The U.S. industrial base simply cannot produce advanced interceptor missiles fast enough to supply both the war in Ukraine and the defense of the Israeli Gulf coalition.
It's impossible.
Yeah. The sources report that the U.S. is actively drawing up plans to divert vital air defense systems away from Eastern Europe to sustain the Middle East.
Which is a devastating, perhaps fatal blow to Ukraine's ability to maintain the integrity of its airspace against Russian aviation and missile strikes.
Exactly. The U.S. is voluntarily cannibalizing its European defense posture to protect the Persian Gulf.
And Russia is actively feeding the fire in the Middle East to ensure the U.S. remains bogged down.
Right.
The intelligence sources detail a massive airlift of Russian material into Iran.
They are supplying advanced anti-jamming variants of the Shahed drone.
Yes.
They are delivering the very Igla man-pads that are currently shooting down American F-18s.
And they are even providing massive shipments of bulk agricultural goods to ensure the Iranian civilian population doesn't revolt under the economic pressure.
It is a mirror image of proxy warfare.
Exactly.
Russia is utilizing Iran to tie down and bleed American resources in the exact same manner that the United States utilized Ukraine to tie down Russian resources over the last 4 years.
But this dynamic is now spilling out of the shadows and creating an incredibly risky escalation directly in European waters.
Yeah, this is the part that could trigger World War III.
With the Strait of Hormuz closed and Russian oil continuing to bypass Western sanctions via the Shadow Fleet, the United Kingdom has decided to intervene.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has authorized an unprecedented escalation of maritime enforcement.
The reports state he has officially greenlit the Royal Navy to physically intercept, board, and seize ships belonging to the Russian Shadow Fleet that are operating without recognized insurance in and around European maritime choke points.
Now, under standard interpretations of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and CLAS, intercepting commercial vessels in international waters without a UN mandate is highly legally dubious.
It's basically bordering on piracy, regardless of the sanctions regime.
Exactly. And Russia is not relying on maritime lawyers to mount their defense.
Wow.
Their response has escalated the situation to the brink of direct great power conflict.
The sources confirm that Moscow has officially authorized the deployment of armed Russian naval infantry to physically board and escort their commercial oil tankers.
They're turning civilian tankers into militarized convoys.
The mechanics of what happens next are terrifying.
Picture it.
Yeah, picture a Royal Navy frigate pulling alongside a rusted, uninsured tanker in the English Channel.
Right.
The British deploy a boarding party via rigid-hull inflatable boats.
Yeah.
But instead of facing a compliant civilian crew, they are staring down the barrels of heavily armed Russian Marines who have explicit orders to defend the vessel with lethal force.
It forces a decision with catastrophic implications.
Right.
If the Royal Navy fires upon those Russian forces to enforce the seizure, you have a direct kinetic shootout between a NATO member state and the Russian military.
Does that trigger NATO Article 5?
That's the terrifying question.
Does the United States, already drowning in the Persian Gulf, suddenly find itself obligated to enter a shooting war with Russia in the North Atlantic?
It is a staggering escalation born entirely out of the economic desperation caused by the closure of Hormuz.
And while NATO and Russia are literally pointing guns at each other over oil tankers, and the U.S. is burning its treasury trying to invade fortified islands, China is executing a masterclass in quiet, pragmatic victory.
Yeah. The Chinese strategy detailed in the geopolitical forecasts is one of extreme patience and insulation.
They saw this vulnerability coming years ago.
They really did.
The sources outline how China has spent the last decade aggressively filling its strategic petroleum reserves.
Right.
They currently hold an estimated 7 months' worth of fully stockpiled domestic energy reserves.
Which is massive.
So while the UK panics and Australia runs out of diesel and the U.S. economy gets battered by $170 oil,
The Chinese domestic grid is completely insulated.
they don't need to fire a single shot to win this phase of the conflict.
No. They are utilizing the chaos to fundamentally elevate their diplomatic and economic standing.
While American diplomats are delivering ultimatums, Chinese envoys are touring the global south and Asia, presenting Beijing as the only rational, stable partner left on the board. The sources even highlight China stepping in to sell advanced AI technology and semiconductor components to traditional U.S. allies like South Korea, whose own economies are faltering under the energy shock.
The term used by the geopolitical analysts in our stack of sources is economic suicide.
For the U.S.
Yes. They argue the U.S. is risking the foundational bedrock of its global power, the petrodollar and its military deterrence, to force an unachievable outcome against a decentralized adversary.
And China is simply standing back, building its domestic renewable infrastructure, integrating the economies of the BRICS nations, and waiting to pick up the pieces of the unipolar world.
The historical parallel being drawn by the academics in our sources is chilling in its accuracy.
Yeah.
They are explicitly comparing the 2026 Hormuz crisis to the 1956 Suez crisis.
Let's explore the mechanics of that parallel, because
Yeah.
it's perfect.
Okay.
In 1956, Egyptian President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal.
Right.
The British Empire, deeply reliant on the canal for access to its colonies and oil, panicked. Along with France and Israel, Britain launched a massive military operation to forcefully seize the canal back.
And operationally, the military campaign was highly successful.
Right.
The paratroopers landed and the forces advanced.
But strategically, it was a profound, world-altering disaster.
Exactly. The United States and the Soviet Union both condemned the invasion.
More importantly, the U.S. weaponized the financial markets, threatening to dump the British pound sterling and block Britain's access to IMF credit.
Yeah. The resulting currency crisis forced the British into a humiliating total withdrawal.
It proved that military power is useless if your currency collapses out from under you.
Historians universally point to the 1956 Suez Crisis as the definitive, undeniable end of the British Empire as a primary global superpower.
And the analysts are forecasting that the failure to secure the Strait of Hormuz will be recorded as the American equivalent.
Yes.
If the United States military cannot project enough power to secure the world's most critical economic choke point,
Right.
and if the global economy is systematically forced to de-dollarize and utilize alternative financial systems just to survive the energy blockade.
The underlying architecture of American hegemony fractures beyond repair.
We have covered an immense landscape of data today.
We really have.
We've explored the physical mechanics of how an infrared Igla missile bypasses a $74 million fighter jet's countermeasures.
Right.
We've mapped the mathematical impossibility of occupying heavily fortified, decentralized tunnel networks with 4,000 Marines.
Yeah.
We've traced the economic contagion of dry diesel pumps in Australia, the collapse of the AI investment boom, and the real-time fracturing of the petrodollar via the shadow fleet.
It's all connected.
We've looked at the dangerous diplomatic brinkmanship of Trump's timeline versus Iran's demands, and the terrifying prospect of a naval shootout between the UK and Russia.
And over all of it, the shadow of the 1956 Suez Crisis looms large as China just waits out the storm.
It is a profound structural realignment of global power.
The metrics of victory are no longer about how many targets you hit. They are about whose economy can actually survive the attrition.
And I want to connect this directly back to you, the listener, and why this matters to your everyday life.
Yeah, this is an abstract theory.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The failure to open the strait is the mechanism driving the cost of your groceries.
Right.
It dictates the cost to heat your home this winter. It determines the stability of your retirement accounts as the tech sector buckles under the weight of inflation.
It is the future purchasing power of your paycheck, and ultimately your nation's standing in the world.
Which brings us to a final, lingering consideration that the military sources barely touch upon, but that we must confront.
Okay.
We have focused extensively on the macroeconomics and the shifting of geopolitical plates.
Yeah.
But look inward at the domestic reality for a moment.
Right.
If the global supply chains remain fractured,
Yeah.
and rolling energy rationing combined with the permanent inflation floor of 5% or more becomes the new, inescapable normal for the Western world, how long until that intense, unyielding economic pressure forces a fundamental rewrite of the domestic social contract?
That is the ultimate chilling question.
Because the social contract of the modern West is built on the promise of predictable growth and baseline stability.
Right.
If the middle class can no longer rely on their governments for that basic economic security,
Yeah.
if you literally cannot afford the fuel to commute to a job that barely pays the grocery bill because of a decentralized war on the other side of the planet.
What happens to the domestic political landscape?
Exactly. Will we see a surge of radical extreme volatility at the ballot box, or worse, in the streets in the years to come?
It takes us right back to the beginning. We always want a clean binary answer of who's winning and who's losing.
But the reality is a deeply complex systemic fracture that is going to fundamentally alter the way we live long before it ever truly heals.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines, and we'll see you next time.